titles, 3 successive championships. Then it was time for you to step aside. Ali McCoy's took over. How would you say he's fared so far?
I think Alistair's fared very well, actually. I know in saying that they're currently in a spell where they're not having their best results this season. I said before I left there that there was an awkward situation at the club. We had when I first came back. If we look back 4 years ago, I had investment in the team then. They also had a few players that had been brought in. Paul Le Guin was still there, so we had actually quite a large group of players. So in the subsequent years, when there was a financial problem and we had to cut them down, we were cutting down a large group of players, but we still had a reasonable choice. Last year probably were stretched, beginning to be stretched to the limit, and I felt that this year that the squad needed some major investment in it to carry on, if they were going to carry on that success. So there hasn't been, I don't think, the major investment in the team that I felt was necessary for it to continue to be successful. So Alistair's, and keeping them up there and keeping them challenging in the championship this season, I think is doing a good job.
Your philosophy has always been that, like, maybe certainly every 3 years, you need to have that reinvestment and bringing in more players and refreshing the side, and that's impossible now at Ibrox. So does that not make the job impossible as well?
Well, it starts to become that way. I don't think there's any doubt that we're seeing that. The numbers have been cut. If we look, for example, at the present moment, you have Stephen Whittaker, Kyle Lafferty and Stephen Naismith especially there as an attacking force, all missing from the group over the last few weeks, and there are no adequate replacement from them in that, in my view, and the team suffers a little bit from that. So therefore it's an awkward situation. The overall scenario of not getting the amounts of players in and the standard of player in that last close season, I think is beginning to tell at the present moment. So hopefully with 10 days or so there's still an opportunity to get 2 or 3 players in, although it certainly looks as though they're not going to be able to spend a lot of money in doing so.
Should he perhaps have thought a bit longer before he took the job at this time, because it was obvious the financial turmoil? Everybody knew, and I think most people guessed that there wouldn't be any buying of players, and that if anything, players would be leaving.
I think if he was sensible about it, he might have thought a bit longer there, and I mean that. Alistair, when I asked him to come back, gave up quite a bit to come in and work as a colleague of mine as an assistant manager, and he gave up a lot for that, and his keenness to be involved at Rangers, and it was solely to be involved at Rangers. I don't think he would have given that up for many clubs that would have got the opportunity to go and work at. So therefore he gave that up. Part of my own decision to leave was I didn't want to keep them hanging on, and they had been promised an opportunity to manage if that happened. So that was part of my own decision. So I, in my own way, tried to explain to him how I felt the club, or what the club's position was at the present moment, and as I've already explained to you, I felt it needed 4 or 5 new players of playing level, not as squad level, but at playing level, to come in and bolster the team. The players that we had to carry the team for 3 or 4 years. It takes a lot to do that. People don't forget how much it takes to keep Rangers and Celtic at a high level all the time, and our squad was getting cut back, and now it's cut back even more. So therefore he knew all that, but nothing could persuade him not to take the job. So he went into it with his eyes open, and I'm sure that he doesn't regret that. Although I think like everything else, once you're put in the job as manager, become far more focused on the problems that are in front of you than even when you're an assistant.
When you look at or read about the player, the standard of player that he's having to bring in on trial and look at, put them through the paces at Murray Park, and a lot of people look and say, well, these are players that would never, in even a few years back, even in your second time around, I've got a look in at Ibrox. How galling must that be for him? Because he must know, he's looking at these players and he must be thinking, these are not the type of players that Rangers should be looking at, but he has no choice.
Well, he has no choice. I mean, that's the thing, and that's what you've got to remember. I was more fortunate in that, as I said to you, when I came back in, we had initial investment. It wasn't until maybe 6 months late, after we made that investment, that the financial problems at the club started to occur. So therefore, I personally get the benefit as a manager from that. Alistair's not having that at the present moment, and I think that overall there has to be a realisation, from everyone that that's the case. They had a terrific start to the season. There was the freshness of one or two, but over a season to win a league championship, you have to go over a lot of hurdles, suspensions, injuries, etc., etc. You need a big squad if you're going to do that. They've not got it. They've not got the level of player to replace even the three that I mentioned. Whittaker, Lafferty, and Naismith. They've not got the players to replace them when they go out the team. So it's going to be a problem, and it looks as though it's going to be an ongoing problem for them as well. But I read in one of the papers this week that Jim Bett stated that he felt that Rangers were going back to a level of the late 70s and the first half of the early 80s. They went 9 seasons, I think, then without winning a league championship. I certainly hope that that's not going to be the case just now. But I think when we're looking at it as an awkward situation for everyone at the club, and personally I don't know how they're going to handle that. Football has become a financially based game, and unless you have a level of finance, then obviously it's going to be extremely difficult for you to compete.
There doesn't seem to be any end to it, though, does there? I mean, it's like we're talking about a January transfer window, but it'll probably be the same in the summer. There won't be any spending then either.
Well, as I say, it doesn't.
So where do Rangers go then if that continues?
Well, that's where they go. That's where they go. They go back to that level they were at pre-Souness, late 70s, early 80s, where it's, because the difficulty is the fact that now we're maybe in the last few years been down to 2 clubs. Celtic have been more stable financially over the last 10 years, never mind, any other. Rangers have had their ups and downs in that respect. Celtic have been more stable in that respect, and that stability will, in many ways, I think give them a huge benefit.
So do you see then that there is a possibility that Celtic could go on a run, perhaps not 9 in a row, but another significantly long run?
I hope not. But I think the stability gives them a big plus, and I think that when you're looking at the clubs, if you're looking how close it was, over the last 3 years that Rangers won a championship there, Rangers are going to have to show a reaction, an off the pitch reaction to the fact that Celtic have come up and are going over the league, and Rangers stressing that there are very few clubs who could win 3 league championships in a row and then find themselves 4 points behind and the season's not finished yet. Are people saying they're not going to do this or they're not going to do that? Rangers are still in there for the championship this season, and but the whole problem lies with the fact that when we do have a new owner and we have a situation there where the new owner is finding it difficult to find, and who can blame anybody that goes in to buy a football club, but they have to try and find that level of investment, and that level of investment was necessary at Rangers in the summertime. It's shown what happens when you don't have the level, so therefore if you're not going to get it in the future, then the pessimistic view that maybe a lot of people are taking at the present moment is going to be very difficult to shift.
If it continues and Alan McCoist is sort of hamstrung and he can't buy in the necessary talent or the talent that he thinks he needs, you know him better than most. Is he strong enough to cope with that and get over that, which is it's a huge hurdle? Is he strong enough to do that?
Of course he is. He is. I mean, that's the one thing that anybody that knows him and knows him well. I think people have this perception, Alistair, but it's not always correct. He's a hardness. He's tough enough. People forget it, even through his career. It wasn't all sweetness and light for him. I mean, and when we talked about Rangers' problems in the early 80s, he was part of the team there, where he was brought in as a young player, and he struggled initially in a team that was struggling to get the level of goals. He overcame, an awful lot of personal abuse, and he held his confidence, and he'll do that as a manager as well. That won't affect him. I think, from one point of view, I think he's a talented lad. I think he will go on and be a good manager, given help. We all need a bit of help. I had plenty of help during my period. He needs a bit of help. He actually needs a bit of help now.
You always hear managers saying that, when a club's in trouble and there are negative headlines associated with that club, almost on a weekly, sometimes a daily basis in the case of Rangers recently, and managers will always say players don't pay any attention to that, and neither do the managers, but so much is going on around Rangers now with the massive tax case hanging over them, at judgment due any day now. Surely it's impossible to keep that away from players.
I think what happened at Rangers was, I always remember having to sit down one day and say, look, lads, you're all for sale. That's a situation that we need to face, and that everybody needs to face. If you've got any problem with it, come and see me. In fairness to the boys at Rangers, they didn't let that affect them. But we were still going along and we were still being successful. I think a lot of the players there, when there was new ownership, they would be hoping that all the problems that were surrounding the club would have been relieved, and we could have got on with winning championships and just concentrating and everybody showing a more optimistic view of what's happening at the club. And I think when that hasn't happened at the present moment, then I think the longer that goes on, then the longer it will start to have an effect with everybody at the club. The uncertainty that surrounds everything at the present moment is bound to have an effect, more than saying 2 or 3 years ago, sorry lads, you're up for sale. There's only 2 periods of the season that could have affected a footballer anyway.
Do you fear for Rangers at this point?
I do. I mean, obviously, as I say, I've been involved long enough to know that the assumptions that people are making about this year's championship are a bit premature. But I would just hope that, after being at Dundee United during a period of when Rangers weren't successful, and then coming to Rangers when there was Graham Souness, was the optimism that was created there. It was a fantastic time to work at the club, and everybody that was at Rangers at that time, I'm talking staff, groundsmen, everybody that was involved, they all got carried along with that aspect of it. We're needing a wee bit of that back again to try and help at the present moment.
It looks as though Jelavic is going to go before the transfer window closes. I was going to ask you how tough it will be to replace him, but actually he won't be replaced, will he?
Well,
so how does Alison McCoy's cope
first and foremost though, right, during this interview I've said to you that a few years ago I had to sit down and tell everybody they were for transfer. There was very few got transferred. There was quite a number of them whose contracts were running out.
You would say circumstances are different now, though.
I think that people have got to start to take into account what's actually happening in Scottish football just now. At the present moment, I keep hearing fanciful figures for players that are playing in Scotland at the present moment being mentioned, and the problem is, clubs are not getting offered that kind of money that you keep hearing getting mentioned. Now, if Rangers pay $4 million for Jelavic at a time when we had to sell 2 players to actually get him when we needed them forward, then there's a reasonable value for the player. Right? If we're going to make a profit on it, then fine. But there's not a lot of clubs in England now have that level of finance at this time of the year. They're spending time, as we're seeing in this transfer window, very, very few big transfers at the present moment in England. So we're seeing a situation just now where maybe there has been a calming down and they're not going to get the figure. So I think it's a wee bit early to say that Jelavic is going to leave before the end of the transfer window. If he did, and I say to you, there is an if there, if he did, then it wouldn't look as though, from what we read, How accurate that is, I'm not sure, but what we would read that Rangers are in a position to replace him at the present moment, and that would obviously be a huge blow to their hopes of getting the championship back, considering that their next best goal scorer, Naismith, is out for the season.
Do you miss it?
I miss it. Yeah, I do. I miss it. I miss bits of the games. You know, the feeling of actually achieving something at the end of a week's work is there. So I miss that a bit. But again, it's not painful. It's nice to be able to do other things at the same time.
So does that mean then that you've finally decided that you're not coming back into the game? Or
I would say that that's it. Everybody keeps asking me. I mean, that'd almost be 100%. I don't see myself coming back into it at the present moment.